Hello, Zoe. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Habib? It's so
Um,
much fun to be here with you.
Likewise, the pleasure's all mine. I'm glad to speak to you.
Yes, I'm such a big fan of yours, as you know.
And likewise, I'm also a big fan. I'm on my third read of your book. I'm on my
Oh
third
my
read.
goodness.
Phenomenal job. Phenomenal job you've done. Um, but before we get into the book itself, do you mind giving a quick, I did a very, very brief intro, but do you mind giving a quick elevator pitch intro to who you are and the work you do, and then we'll dive into I want to call it a conversation rather than interview.
Okay, yes, please. So my name is Zoë Kors, and I am a sex and intimacy coach. I'm located in California, in Los Angeles, but I coach people pre-pandemic. All my work is through Zoom, and so I've been working with clients all over the world. I'm also the resident sex and intimacy coach for sexual wellness app called Coral. Um, and uh, and I also do quite a bit of work with people recovering from sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior and their partners who are recovering from the trauma of betrayal. So that's a whole other sort of population that I work with and specialize in. But I've got a private practice and I've written a book, and so that's me. Yeah.
Radical Empathy, which we'll talk about, and a podcast as well.
Yes, thank you. I have a podcast that I launched just in advance of the book called the Radical Intimacy Podcast. And we have one season up. I'm getting ready to record a second season with my husband, who also coaches people. And so that'll be either 6 or 8 episodes. We're still mapping it out, but we're about to start recording.
Lovely, lovely, great introduction.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a few questions.
Yeah.
Some of it obviously relating to your work, some of it relating to your you being an orphan. There's a couple of questions that people have asked me for advice and tips in terms of not only about the book that you wrote, but some of the challenges that you faced. And also, I want to touch on that article that I posted, and I wanted to get some of your, I wanted to receive your response because I've received a number of messages, both comments and DMs, but we'll go into that a bit later. I
Okay.
first want to touch on your book, Radical Intimacy. And again, just for the benefit of people joining, I'm speaking to Zoë Kors, who is a sex and intimacy coach. She's a thought leader, a sought after thought leader based in the United States of America, but she's got clients around the world. And she's also a contributor to the sexual wellness app Coral. And she's also got a podcast called the Radical Intimacy Podcast. This is, I believe, it's your first book. Is that correct?
It is my first book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Starting point, what was a great book? Again, like I said, I loved it. I'm on my third read. But and what I found about it that I really enjoyed that it was I found it introspective, reflective, and something and an easy to read book for both men and women alike. Obviously, I'm a man, so I can speak from a male perspective, but I found it and I've recommended it to a number of men as well to read because I find I don't find many books that men on average find, especially when it comes to relationships, can digest. This is
Yeah.
one of few that I definitely recommend. So again, you've done a very good job because I think you appeal to
Oh,
both genders phenomenally well.
oh,
So yeah, great job.
fabulous. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
What inspired you to write the book?
Um, that's a big question. I've always considered myself a writer, and I've done a lot of editorial work. I was the senior editor of LA Yoga magazine for several years. And from the time that I was a small child, I just sort of knew I would write a book at some point. So that's always been something that I intended to do. Um, why now? Because I feel like I've been coaching long enough now that I had sort of organically developed this methodology of human connection and intimacy, and it's something that I think that almost everybody who comes through my doors, virtual doors, um, is looking really for a deeper connection to the people in their lives and to themselves. And so it just felt like, especially on the heels of the pandemic, it it feels like something that is really needed, that people are hungry for, and I have something to say about it. And so it just felt like the right timing.
Lovely. And you spoke about the three different kinds and levels of intimacy. Do you mind giving an overview in terms of what they are?
Yeah. So I define three kinds of intimacy: emotional, physical, and what I call energetic. Which I can explain a little bit more. It's something that I don't know that I've heard anybody else really talk about. I hear a lot of people talk about intellectual intimacy, which to me is sort of the opposite of intimacy. When you're sort of all up in your head and your intellect and sharing ideas, it's not necessarily um, fostering a certain level of vulnerability and closeness. So emotional, physical, energetic, and then the three levels of intimacy are self, other, and world. And so world can mean big, groups of people, community, the communities that we're members of, or the global community, and also nature, the earth, the planet, the other species on the planet. So when you grid those out into like a tic-tac-toe board, or a like a bingo card, and you sort of look at the intersections of the three kinds and the three levels of intimacy, you have 9 areas of opportunity to cultivate connection and intimacy. So that looks like physical intimacy with myself, physical intimacy with other, physical intimacy with the world, and the same for the other 2 kinds of intimacy. Does that make sense?
It does, it does. And I'm just wondering which of those three kinds of intimacy do people find are most detached from, or find it quite, or they're disconnected from? Which of those
Well,
three?
that's a very good question. And I find that people are either emotionally based and have a much easier time connecting emotionally, and then sort of lack a comfort level with physical intimacy, or vice versa, where somebody will come and be very physically oriented. So the thing that they want is, and I see this in couples often, one member of the couple will say, like, I'm not interested in sex unless I feel like there's an emotional connection. And then the other partner will say, I need to have sex in order to feel safe enough to connect emotionally. So they're at odds with each other. And very often the energetic piece, the tools that I give people and the framework that I give them to be able to see that there's another kind of intimacy that's available to them. That's usually neutral ground, right? So being able to step out into like a witness consciousness, and to connect beyond the utility of speech and touch, to share shared experiences, a road trip or a hike, or sharing a movie, sharing a Netflix, and cooking dinner together. Those are shared experiences that can cultivate a kind of closeness and intimacy that is comfortable for both of them.
And again, I just wanted to clarify for the benefit, especially of our male viewers. By physical intimacy, I'm assuming you're not just referring to just sex, sexual
Mhm.
intimacy.
I'm not. I'm referring to sex. Sex is actually one part of physical intimacy. So there are 3 kinds of intimacy. Physical is one of them, and sex is a small part of physical intimacy. So when we're talking about, we conflate intimacy. We sort of conflate the 2 words, sex and intimacy, or we use intimacy as a euphemism when we want to be polite and we're talking about sex. But the fact is that intimacy is complex and broad and means a lot of different things to different people.
Mm. And from your experience, is that something that a lot of couples struggle with in terms of like terms, and like, for example, like you said, intimacy is often conflated with sex, and where one partner may be referring to they want more intimacy, the other partner, usually the man, interprets that meaning sex, or vice versa. Is that something that you've come across?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the first things that I do with a couple and an individual really is just to sort of like review vocabulary and concepts and terms and just sort of like look at the landscape we're working in and define it a little bit.
I think it's quite difficult, especially when people, like you said, maybe want to use polite terms or neutral terms or terms that maybe not so explicit or maybe somewhat offensive. So they'll use intimacy as opposed to obviously sex, but then maybe what they are seeking is sex. But then if you're not actually explicit or clear, then how can you expect the other person, whether it's your therapist, counselor, or even your partner, to understand what you're looking for if you're not very clear in terms of what you're seeking? So yeah,
Yeah,
I love that. I think it's important that, words or terms are kind of clearly defined. So at least the
yeah.
recipient of the message understands what you're saying. Um, Someone actually did ask us, it's quite a long question, but I'm going to try and summarize it. So the person is an aspiring writer, and they were asking, what were the challenges you faced in writing your book?
Um, uh, yeah, there are so many different aspects of writing a book. I don't know that I necessarily faced any challenges. I set out to write a book, and I really wanted to do it with a major publisher. I made a decision, a lot of soul searching, really decided that I preferred not to just self-publish, which many of my friends do, and it's a perfectly legitimate and common thing to do. But I wanted very much to reach people. And I don't have a lot of money to sort of finance the publication, to self-publish and promote. So I was really looking at this point in my career for a little bit of a team behind me. So so I think that one of the things that I put a lot of effort and some money and resources into writing a book proposal that was likely to sell. I wanted to give myself the best chance of landing an agent, and that means really thinking hard about what it is that I'm writing and what do people need, and writing a marketing plan for it, and really being able to sort of show people that this is a book worth investing in. And so I did that. I took my time with it, and I hired a consultant to help me shape some of those parts of the book proposal that I didn't was not an expert in. I'm an expert in the content, but then wanted to really be able to communicate with the publishing industry. So so that was that I put a lot of effort there. And now, honestly, right now is the biggest part, the biggest challenge for me is really marketing the book, selling the book, getting it in people's hands. I'm not, my second book will be an easier sell, I think, because people will already know who I am. But I have a nice little following on Instagram and a little mailing list of my own, but like I'm really looking to reach many more people. So I'm so grateful to people like you, Habib, who support and promote my work. And so this is really the hardest part for me.
No, I only support books that I like, so it's well deserved. It's not because I like obviously as a person, but your book is a great book, and I think it deserves to be in the hands and homes of both men and women and couples alike. So yeah, it's a great book. So I'm more than happy to kind of help do what I can. I'm glad you mentioned and you spoke about well, you was aware about the differences, obviously, of self-publishing and going with a mainstream publisher. And I'm just wondering, is that something that you was always aware of, especially like in terms of, especially if you go with the self-publishing route? Because I get asked that question quite a bit. And not many people are aware of like the sales and marketing, even the cost element. And it's something which, like you said, you was aware of. How was you aware of that? Was that something that friends or your own research you found out about those commitments that's required?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been researching, and I have several friends who have, one very good friend, Sarah Marshank. She has a book called Being Selfish. It's a memoir, and she has sort of a self-development platform called Selfistry. And I watched her talk to major publishers and agents and hybrid publishers and she ended up self-publishing. So I sort of followed her on that path a few years ahead of my own book. And that was a good education for me. But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, look, it's all good. It's all fine. For me, the writing of the book is as much as I love writing, like I consider myself a writer and an author, and it would make me the happiest in life to just, you know, write books, write books and facilitate workshops and retreats. Those are my number one passions. But I didn't feel like I wanted to write a book as part of my platform to sort of show who I am, or it really, I don't know. It wasn't a necessity. Really, what I wanted was for people to get the work through that form. So, yeah.
And you do have a digital presence on social media, on the various platforms, on YouTube, which is good. And that's something that, because I do some work with publishers, both self-publishers and mainstream publishers. And one of the things that behind the scene consultancy work, one of the things I always say is that, okay, you may be an expert in obviously the subject matter of whatever you're writing about, but you can't be afraid of self-promotion, especially in this day and age. Whether you're with a mainstream publisher or not, you need to get out there, whether it's doing like IG lives, YouTube conversations, you need to interact. And I think one of the great things about the publishing industry, or with authors, I think a lot of people are willing to collaborate. So it's not, and obviously the more people that are reading, and if you're working and collaborating with people that have written similar books or similar subjects, you obviously similar audiences. It's not a case of this is my audience, I can't really share it, so to speak. It doesn't really work like that from my experience in the book publishing industry. So that's why it's good, but it does require authors to be somewhat salespeople and self-marketers. I think you have to have your own presence. Yeah, that's definitely required.
And I'm not, you know, like I love to talk about this stuff all day long, and and I don't find myself saying very often, like I'll say to these people here listening, buy my book.
Yeah.
It's a good book. Like there's a lot in there and you will benefit from it. And it's an easy read, and go buy my book. Like that's, thank you. That's not an easy thing for me to say, in spite of the fact that, that I love this book. And at the end of the day, you know, on the eve of publication, when I'm wondering, is this book really going to sell? And is this going to be successful? And are people going to like it? And at the very end of the day, I can say that this is the book that I wanted to write. And not every author can say that. You know, when you're working with a major publisher and you're working with an editor, and they have an opinion about what's going to sell and what they want to say. And I was blessed with an incredible editor, Renee Sedlier, and she just was my champion. And she loved what I had to say and really encouraged me to push some boundaries. Chapter 11, The Attachment Myth. That was something that I was prepared to let go of for a publisher, for an editor. And she just was like, no, this is the heart of the book.
I've actually got two questions on the attachment myth. I'm going to come to that. So I'm surprised that why was you willing to let that go? Because I love that chapter. I think it was important. I mean, just wondering why would.
You know, I mean, that's sort of been my message for a long time. Because I wasn't sure. I was ready when I decided not to self-publish, but to go with a publisher. They're accountable too for the messages in the book. And if they felt that they were marketing to a group of people who would not receive that information well, I was sort of prepared going into this whole journey that that might be a little bit too far for some audiences, and I can deliver that message through social media, through other things, through papers, you know, giveaways, PDFs, a program, you know, all kinds of things that a major mainstream book, depending on the publisher and the editor, might feel like they wanted to pull back a little bit, and you know how it is.
To be honest, I wasn't aware, I didn't think about that, but that's actually yeah, now that makes sense, but I wasn't even aware of that. But obviously, you need to take obviously the publisher's business into consideration, and obviously, like you said, if you're going to put something out there that might not go down well with some of their readers, and I can understand why. Yes, there's compromise in that regards. Since we brought up chapter 11, the attachment myth, I mean, I was going to talk about it a bit later on, but since we're on the topic, do you mind just giving a very high level overview in terms of what the attachment myth is and what you're speaking about in chapter 11?
Yes. Okay. So, what I call the attachment myth is this like pervasive, yeah, like limiting idea, um, that I find particularly in the book is extremely inclusive, and I've had sensitivity readers, and I really, tried to sort of address, it's part of my thing. Like, I don't care who you want to have sex with and what body parts you have. You deserve to have a nourishing, delicious, pleasureful sex life, right? Chapter 11 specifically addresses a limiting belief that I find really pervasive in the cisgender heterosexual population. And that is, I have women come to me all day long in wherever I'm speaking that say, I can only enjoy sex if there's an emotional attachment there. Like I don't enjoy sex unless there's like a relationship and a commitment and an emotional intimacy. Or I am only willing to have sex if those conditions exist, right? So um, my this is a myth. It's a myth that women can't physically enjoy sex if there isn't emotional attachment. And you'll see it like in evolutionary psychology. People will, sort of justify that information, or in my favorite, the sort of gender polarity community, David Data and all of that. There's just and brain science, neuroscience. People will tell you that women's brains are only conducive to, sexual stimulation and desire and arousal if there's an emotional attachment there. And I just don't buy any of it. I really don't. And there are societies all over the world who live differently and experience sexuality differently. And East Africans and Kunyaza, which is something you're an expert in, Habib, like that's one of them, and this idea that women's pleasure is contingent on some sort of like relational contract is really, it's misogynistic, if you ask me.
And did you receive any pushback with the attachment myth, like debunking the attachment myth? So sorry.
I haven't received any so far. I'm waiting for it, and and to be honest with you, if people push back, if I get angry emails and all of that, then I know I've been successful. Like I'm inviting that because I know that I've touched a nerve, and the more people are offended or defensive about it, the more I'm waking people up. So I invite that, and I have not yet really gotten significant pushback from that.
Lovely, lovely. And the title, that was actually should have been one of my first questions. Radical Intimacy. How did you come up with that name? What was the inspiration behind that?
I've been using that name for many years, and really what I my own personal path. I'm a Zen Buddhist practitioner, and I have a background in Tantra. I've studied and practiced Tantra for a long time, and did a lot of work, spent a lot of time with Ram Dass, who is another spiritual teacher in the Bhakti yoga tradition. And so there's sort of a in my own personal journey has really been centered around the idea of intimacy with self and with other and with the world, with the sort of the mystery or the spirit world or the oneness, however you want to sort of frame that. And so sexuality for me, discovering Tantra and discovering that like sex can be a spiritual practice, you know, sex can be a form of prayer. That really was revolutionary for me and changed my whole life and my experience of myself. So that when you sort of distill it all down, it really comes to intimacy and connection and closeness. And so when I was developing a program for specifically for couples, what I started to realize in working with them was that really what they're longing for. They might say they're longing for sex, or they might be coming to me because they have a desire discrepancy where one partner wants sex more than the other one, which is almost every couple. The fact that the idea that two members of a couplehood will want the same amount of sex all the time is ridiculous. So it just seemed to me that everybody is looking for intimacy. And so radical intimacy for me is this idea and this model of intimacy and relationship that is multidimensional. It's radical. Like it takes place in, and there's opportunity throughout your life for cultivating that kind of connection. When you, with a cup of coffee, with a partner, with a friend, with yourself, with a tree, you know, it's all over.
And with, obviously, because you're speaking about radical intimacy, which, like you mentioned before, just is it doesn't just encompass sex. Is this book like an expansive version of the article that you wrote for Elephant Journal that went viral? I think was that on radical intimate sex, or was
It's
that?
6 ways to have intimacy, and that
Yeah,
was
that's one.
the that
Yeah.
was the very beginning of my working with sexuality in terms of clients. Up until then, I had been doing sort of a broader. I was doing a lot of editorial work, and I was doing a much broader version of coaching people. And I I had a conversation with a friend of mine and gave her some tips for like more intimacy with her husband, and it was so powerful for her that I wrote this article, and it went so viral so quickly that I thought, my goodness, am I going to be that woman that talks about sex all the time? That's me. It's really, universe. That's what you're giving me. Uh, so and indeed, that's what happened. Yeah, the book is, look, I think the book is it's a broader and a more dimensional version of that article. That article was specifically like, how do we bring how do that article was me suggesting in plain language for people who have potentially no desire to sit on a meditation cushion or get on a yoga mat, or ways to take some of those principles, those powerful principles and experiences that I had in practicing Tantra, and bringing them to the bedroom of people who just are, regular folk who don't want anything woo woo. They just want to feel connected and excited.
And just for the benefit of people joining in, I'm speaking to Zoë Kors, who is a US-based sex and intimacy coach, expert, and author of Radical Intimacy. She's also the host of the Radical Intimacy podcast, as well as a contributor to the sexual wellness app Coral. So we're speaking about her career as an author and a writer. And now I want to go into, we spoke a little bit about her book, which again is available from Amazon and all good bookshops, Radical Intimacy. Very good, highly recommended for both men and women alike, whether you're single or in a relationship, married, or what have you. I've got a couple of questions that people have asked me that I want to ask you. Some of them I'm sure you've probably heard a number of times. So the first question is, how can I have more passionate sex with my husband? Or maybe you
Uh,
can tell them to go to your YouTube page because you've got a couple of videos that answer some of these questions, to be fair.
yeah. You know, more passionate. I think that there's and husband. So so you're married, and you've probably been married for, a few years at least. And I would say that as time goes on, there's this idea that we know everything about each other, and nothing could be farther from the truth. There's always something new to learn about each other, emotionally or intellectually or physically. So I would really suggest going back to the beginning and dating each other again and flirting with each other, um, and you know pretending that you're just meeting each other, that there's a stepping into a perspective of discovery, uh, teasing each other, flirting with each other. Foreplay all day is something that I'm a big proponent of. So the other thing that I'm going to suggest is scheduling sex, like actually making time. People bristle at this all the time, that if you have to schedule sex, then it's not passionate, that it's not hot. And nothing could be farther from the truth. When we're dating, we're scheduling sex. We're making conscious time, intentional time to be intimate, whether it's full on intercourse or just, dinner and making out. But we are putting something on the calendar, an opportunity for that kind of spontaneity to grow. So now that you're married, and life is super busy and you're loaded down with responsibilities, put some time on the calendar to put down the devices and just focus on each other, and that should help quite a bit.
Lovely. Um, I've got another question. I'm going to summarize them because there's about three of them. They're quite similar. It's where all three, I'm assuming, from women, and they're asking for some advice in terms of how they can get out of their head. So one woman says that when she's intimate, it's fine, but up until no, when foreplay and foreplay is fine, but getting when actual act starts, that's when she can't get out of her head. Another one is talking about she's always thinking about her kids or other things apart from a partner. So do you have any tips or advice to kind of help a woman get out of her head?
I sure do. Part of it is a practice. I'm going to recommend a practice, and the other part of it is to just recognize that you have a choice about what you think, right? So and this isn't the easiest thing in the world, but there's something in you, in your past, that is causing you to either feel like you have to get a lot done, that you're busy, that you have to figure everything out, that you don't deserve to let go and be present and feel pleasure, that sex is not something that you deserve to have, that you deserve to have a pleasurable experience, or that it's not really about you, that it's about your husband, which is part of this article that we're going to touch on. Um, uh, but the practice is this. It's a mindfulness practice, and what you're doing is creating new neural pathways and creating a regular practiced way of getting out of your head, not in the bedroom. And so once you sort of master that outside the bedroom, you can apply it to inside the bedroom. What I like to do is, for me, it's coffee. For me, okay, are you guys there?
Yeah, still
Okay.
there.
Um, So for me, I use coffee, but you can also do this with an apple or a piece of fruit or really anything. I'll tell you what I do with coffee. I have I grind my beans. I open the package of beans. I smell the beans. I grind the beans. I listen with all five senses. I take in this experience, and I turn my thoughts from anything else. I just keep bringing them back to what I'm doing and the activity that I'm doing. And I immerse myself in that activity with all five senses. So then I boil the water and I listen to the water boiler and how that sounds. And then I put the ground beans in the filter and I pour over the water and then I taste it and like really literally immerse in all five senses. I take about 10-15 minutes in the morning to make the coffee and then to have the first sip. And I think about not only what's happening in the moment, but I think about everything that has brought this experience to me right now. The plant, the soil that grew the plant, that grew the beans, the farmer that picked the beans, the roaster that roasted the beans, the grocer that stocks the beans, right? The person that drove the beans to the roaster, you know, all of that whole path. And nothing else is going on in my head. I'm not thinking about the bills or the clients or the this or the book or anything. I'm just fully present in that experience and taking it in with all five senses. So imagine that level of intimacy that I have with my coffee. Imagine bringing that to the bedroom, right? You're just there. And every time your thoughts go somewhere else, are back in your head, you bring them back to the physical sensation that you are experiencing in the moment, right? Right out of your head. The best way out of your head is through your body. Helpful?
Very helpful indeed. Thank you. Now, I want to touch, so just by way of background for people who are joining, or just recently joined, I'm speaking to Zoë Kors, who is a sex and intimacy coach, a sex expert, an author of Radical Intimacy. Go and check out the book. She's also the host of the Radical Intimacy podcast, and she's also contributed to the sexual wellness app, Coral. I'd like to speak to you about this article, this controversial article, which I posted on my page. So again, just by way of background for people who are listening who may not be aware. So the headline of the article states, yes, you should always have sex with your husband when he wants it. Yes, you should always have sex with your husband when he wants it. It was written by a woman from America. She's an author, blogger, amongst other things. And basically, this article was a follow-up article to a previous article, which she was giving advice to women and speaking about her own experiences as a married woman, where she listed, I think, 5 mistakes she made as a wife or something along those lines. And one of the points was not having as much sex as her husband would like. And then she wrote this follow-up article. Now, in summary, she was just basically saying that my understanding of the article was that the wife, or she advises women to comply with their husband's sexual advances, obviously providing that he's a loving and caring and affectionate husband. Now, this article got a lot of reaction, both positive and negative, and I did post it on my story just asking people's thoughts. Did they agree, disagree, or it depends? Interestingly enough, so when you like go on my page, most of the comments is, you know, they disagree. Some people said that she was encouraging marital rape, saying that it was misogynistic, it's outdated views. But then when I posted it on my story, so I would say of the comments, maybe like 80% to 90% disagreed with the article. Whereas when I posted the story on my when I posted the article on my Instagram story, then I ran a poll. 43% of people agreed, 22% disagreed, and 35% said it depends. So it's quite interesting. Like when you look at the comments, it was like 80 to 90%. Yes, we totally disagree. Whereas when I posted it, and to be fair, I'm not obviously going to name anyone, but a number of the people that agreed, there was a lot of men that agreed, and some women, to be fair, but there was more people that obviously left a mark on the poll as opposed to left a comment. So first and foremost, I just wanted to hear your views about what you thought about the article, and then if we can have maybe like a bit of a discussion in terms of both sides of how people, if you understood what the woman was trying to get at and why maybe it had such a visceral reaction amongst people, both men and women alike.
Yeah. Well, so the first thing that I have to say is that I don't entirely, I have mixed opinion about the article. The first thing is that I do this idea that women deprioritize sex, and and that there are a lot of sexless marriages, particularly after kids. This woman has kids, and she describes a situation that I think most mothers will identify with, where so many, she's making lunches and she's cleaning up and she got the kids to bed, and like a lot of those sort of duties fall on her, and you know, by the time she gets in bed she's exhausted, and sex feels like something that her husband needs from her, and so it's sort of natural to say no because she doesn't feel like it, and you know, it's just one more thing to do. And I think many women feel that way, American women at least. And so I understand that, and I also understand the idea that um, you know, a man, a husband does not want to go the rest of his life without having sex. She draws some things, like she compares the male experience, you know, and one of the reasons why you should have sex with him, because of, you know, what we call blue balls, which is really sort of um, epididymal hypertension. And she kind of like links to a Snopes article as evidence that men um, it, have this experience when they don't have sex of built up pressure, and they have to get rid of the pressure, and so better to do it with you than by masturbating. And like, that's a very weak argument in my case. Epididymal hypertension, or blue balls, is really not harmful, not that common. I think it's a much better argument to say that like sex is an important part of a relationship, and we are not taught that, and women are so living in such a restrictive culture that they just don't understand, and they are not given permission to know the full extent of pleasure in their bodies that's possible. So, you know, I think that what I really, you know, if I were going to write an article, maybe I will, sort of answer to this article, what I would write is that a couple together needs to prioritize pleasure and sex in their relationship with each other, and whatever that means in terms of like division of labor, and you know, creating a situation in which a woman actually does have energy for sex, and sex that is actually ridiculously pleasurable, where her pleasure is the priority. I think that, you know, that's really the article I wish she had written. Does that make sense?
It does. No, it does. I'm nodding and listening in a way. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I agree with that. I just found the article. I think, um, I mean, I did receive a number of DMs that people saying I should have posted it and this, that, and other. But what I liked about such, or maybe because I'm a provocateur at heart, but what I liked about such articles is that, um, whether you agree, disagree, it helps start a conversation, and especially for both men and women alike. So, if it's something where a number of men maybe didn't initially see any issue with that article because they or maybe they understood, or they thought they understood what she was getting at, maybe it could have been communicated better, like the way you've communicated it now. So the way you've communicated, I don't think any fair-minded person, both male and female, will have an issue with what you said. Whereas I think even when I was looking at some of the comments and some people that were sending me DMs, it was the way it came across. I think that's where, well, like some people had issue with like the reference to a delicate female brain, or something along those lines. They found it quite infantilizing or patronizing. So, and then when you insult someone, then obviously the message gets lost. So I think that's also part of maybe the learning experience, even for men as well, that like you said, it's important for both both people in that relationship to prioritize sexual pleasure, and then hopefully those type of issues probably wouldn't exist, rather than looking at sex just being like a duty that she has to do, and if not, she's like a bad woman or bad wife kind of thing, which I think maybe that's the message that maybe a number of people had an issue with that article. And again, I don't really want to say too much else, because I think people should read it and make their own minds. But that was my initial thoughts. I'm glad you shared your insight on it. Maybe you could write a follow-up article. It could be part of.
Well, maybe I will. Maybe I will. I'll
Yeah.
tell you. Here's what I think, and I think about this often, Habib, when I'm thinking about, you know, and you'll have to sort of buy my book and read the first chapter, in which I talk about my 10-year sexless marriage in my 20s. But I'm familiar with this, and the sexless marriage was because I didn't want to have sex with my husband, and he was a beautiful. I mean, we're still like brother and sister, and we share a daughter, and it's all good. But there was no sex going on, and other than to conceive my daughter, which was a little bit miraculous, as I talk about. But I often think in dealing with people, you know, who don't want to have sex with their spouse, I am often thinking with women, if sex meant kunyaza, the world, it would be a completely different story. If that's what women experienced in bed, that level of pleasure and that level of prioritization, then women would want to have all kinds of sex all the time. The problem is that, what's the other article that you posted yesterday? You know, like, men don't even know what a woman's pleasure looks like.
Yeah.
And there's that meme or that video on social media, flying around social media, where people stop men on the street with a diagram of a labia or a pelvic diagram and of a woman, and like they don't even know where a clitoris is, or a urethra, or that a woman has a urethra, and or, you know, where the uterus is. I mean, they don't know anything.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah. It is. I'm gonna come back to you on that. So that wasn't that nicely leads me on to my next question. But before we go on to that second article, just for the benefit of anyone who wants more information on how to overcome a sexless marriage and have a radically intimate, passionate sex life, read the book. We're not going to talk about it anymore here. We've spoken now. That's the plug. So you've got a bit of, but if you want to know more, then again, read the book, and then you get more details. So we're not going to share all of the secrets and the gems on this Instagram live where it's free. So I think you've said enough already. Now coming to that second article about, which I posted again on my page, which according to a study, I think it was like 49% of newlywed husbands in America wasn't able to identify when their wife had experienced an orgasm. And then they also found out that 87% of the men consistently orgasm during sex, compared to only 47% of the women. Now, again, some of the comments, it wasn't as much as the previous article, but it was quite like, some people were like, or some were like, men should know. And that's what some of the women were saying. And then some of the men were like, well, how do you expect us to know if we haven't been educated, or, you know, or we've been miseducated? So how can we, or how can, especially where there's a knowledge gap maybe with the men, how can men maybe, how can they understand when a woman has climax or she's sexually satisfied? What would you say to her?
Stop watching pornography. Stop considering pornography your de facto sex education, because none of it is, I mean, I shouldn't say none of it. There is some ethical, realistic porn, but not much of it. And it just portrays women's sexuality in general in a completely fictitious way. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have this thing called the internet, which is a huge superhighway of information about just about anything, including the 4 stages of arousal. And you might also read about your own arousal. And what's happening in your body and what's happening in the female body, and the physiological sexual response. You know, we don't teach people, you know, the very little sex education that we get in school, at least in the United States, if there is any, is only reproductive, and it's very abstracted, and everybody's afraid to speak about pleasure because they think that it's going to inspire people to experience sexual pleasure themselves, God forbid. And so, you know, information's not hard to get. You just have to want to get it, you know? So the good old Google machine is a good place to start, or buy my book. Emily Nagoski also.
Buy the book. Lovely. And again, just the final 2 points before we end. You mentioned obviously you specialize in treating sexual addiction, and then you also, I always forget the second term. Is it compulsive sexual behavior?
Yeah,
Just wondering, what's the difference between the two, if you can?
There is no difference. The difference between the two are two schools of thought about whether or not you can actually be addicted to sex. So there's a group of people who, in short, who just, you know, who call sex addiction because it behaves very much like an addiction, the way food does, or love addiction or weed addiction, you know, like it has all the characteristics of addictive behavior. And then there are some people who just are sticklers about, you know, addiction is only if there's a physical addiction, a physiological dependence on a substance. So, so I sort of name it that way. And I'm a little bit like Switzerland. I don't really care if you call it addiction. I don't care if you call food addiction. I get it. But I don't want to alienate people who, you know, who are of the camp that believe that, you know, compulsive sexual behavior is more accurate. And with that is also betrayal trauma. Like that's a whole school of thought. There was a time when, you know, that we're sort of in a very 12-step kind of way that the sex addiction community, they treated partners of sex addicts as codependent. And that's not at all necessarily true at all. There are plenty of people who act out compulsively with sex that has nothing to do with their partner, and their partner is actually, you know, a lot of their behavior and reaction is due to being traumatized by the discovery of the betrayal. So
Lovely. And just before I end, I loved actually. I was listening to one of your videos. I should have led this. I should have said this from the beginning, where you described your work as obviously a sex and intimacy coach who works with women and couples to reclaim sexuality as a form of creative self-expression. Wow, that's powerful. Do you mind explaining what you mean by sexuality as a form of creative self-expression? What do you mean by that?
yeah, I think that, you know, sexuality, we have a lot of people think about sex as something we do, as an activity. And actually, when you are expressing yourself sexually, whether you're doing that alone with yourself in a solo session, or with a partner or multiple partners, it is, we have a sexual identity, and that means that our sexuality is part of who we are. It's not just something we do, it's really who we are. And so, you know, no matter what it is that you like to do, it could involve, you know, lingerie and ropes, and or, you know, chocolate sauce, or, you know, dancing in a particular way, or a particular position, or form of pleasurable activity. Whatever it is, there's a creativity to that. And if you sort of think about the creative process, it's almost like I remember Paul McCartney in talking about yesterday and writing yesterday. He talked about like being a vessel, or being a conduit. Like it comes from somewhere else. It's like you're creating something from nothing, and you don't even. It comes through you in a way, and so sexual expression can be just like that, where you're just allowing the energy, the life force energy, and in Sanskrit that's called Shakti, or Shakti Kundalini and energy. It's creative life force energy, and it just sort of comes through you when you are surrendering to the experience and the pleasure, and you're really out of your head. You're not in your head. It's almost that same sort of altered state of consciousness that comes with the creative process.
Amazing.
A little heady.
Amazing, amazing. And is there anything that you want to plug, or any events or webinars or anything you've got coming up? Or where can people, if you can let people know where they can find you, more about your work, and obviously where to purchase your book?
Yeah. Everything that I do, you can find at zoekors.com, ZOEKORS.com. I link to the book. I talk about the book there. You can find the book anywhere you buy books, in physical bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. If you want to support independent bookshops online, you can go to bookshop.org. Yeah, it's all about the book right now, and maybe the podcast. Sign my mailing list. I send sort of I'm a little lazy about it, but I send a weekly email out with different information and yummy tips and things. So
amazing. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'll save, and when I'll save this, I'll put links obviously to your IG page, and give people information to your website, and obviously to the book, so they can purchase it. Really great read. Again, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for writing a book. Thank you for the shout out as well. But honestly, really enjoyed it. And like I said, I'm looking forward to finish the third read. And again, I'm looking forward to see more work from you, Zoe. And yeah, thank you for gracing us with your presence today.
Yes, thank you so much. What a pleasure. I'm honored to be on your Instagram Live. Thank you so much.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the day. All right. Take care. Thank you everyone for joining.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.